Hello and welcome to this recording of a webinar on teaching large groups. Now in the last unit we looked at teaching small groups and that unit involved holding a webinar as well. Now I want us to look at how we can use webinars to teach larger groups, and I'm going to define larger groups here as groups of, let's say, around 50, 100, 200 students. Obviously, with groups of that size in a webinar context like this one, the mode of delivery is going to be a bit more like broadcast than it is about engagement, because you can't call people in to make contributions all the time, whether by audio or by video, and you certainly can't just open up all mics if you have 200 students, say, joining you in a webinar room. But I think you can do a lot better than just talking through bullet points on slides for an hour. Can we, I wonder, do at least what Christopher Bigsby says we should do? I'm just going to call up my first slide now with a quotation from Christopher Bigsby on it. And he says, "The best lectures are not those that attempt to pour information into your ear, but those that send you spinning off into your own mind. Outside the lecture theatre is where your real inquiry begins." And the same goes for this scenario. Outside of the webinar is probably where the real inquiry begins. So can we facilitate webinars for large groups in such a way that they aren't just pouring information into students' ears, but they're sending students spinning off into their own minds? Before we look specifically at webinars, I want to revisit some of the points about face-to-face lecturing that I looked at in the face-to-face workshop. And the key question that drove us throughout that workshop was this one: is lecturing a performance art? So we talked about lots of things within that idea of performance. We talked about eye contact and not getting too lost in a script. I'm a firm believer that having a little bundle of notes, whether printed on a page or on prompt cards, whatever you like, is fine. If you're able to talk with no structure prompts at all for 2 hours, then very well done to you. I would rather use some notes in front of me, in my hand, than be completely led by slides behind me and simply just walk through the bullet points, talk through them for 2 endless hours. I'd much rather just have some brief notes in my hand. But on the flip side, I don't want to be reading from a script either. I want it to be fairly natural. I don't want to be stuck at the lectern in the corner of the lecture theatre for the whole 2 hours either. I'd like to be able to walk around. So I think there's a balance to be found there. But I'm very keen to stress that some notes in your hand is perfectly okay. Body language. Now then, I'm a great pacer in lectures. I do tend to run around a little bit, which can get quite distracting for my audience. And I know I've worked hard over a number of years to try and rein that in, to try and stand more in one place. But also I've worked hard on speaking to all corners of a room, looking around, gesturing, moving about the room. You know that it's very difficult to speak to somebody in the very back corner of a lecture theatre when you're right at the front in the opposite corner. And so if you're expecting responses from a group or questions to be asked, you may need to go right up to that person. Yes, walk right up the aisles, up the steps, to go and talk to somebody who wants to contribute. And then, because you're the person who's mic'd up, you might need to repeat that person's response or question to the whole of the room, because the rest of the audience may well not have heard it. And these are all things about body language, positioning, etc. when you're lecturing. Pacing of delivery. Now, should you speak fast? Should you speak very slow? I have found that over the course of a number of years of lecturing, speaking artificially slow has been a useful A useful means of, first of all, allowing me more thinking time as I structure what's about to come out of my mouth, but also helping people to understand what I've said, giving people thinking time, speaking very clearly. And I always think if you're speaking a little slower than what you think is appropriate, you're probably speaking at about the same speed. And this really is about performance, being slightly over-enthusiastic, slightly over-enunciated. This is not my natural way of being with people. I don't speak like this to my family. Imagine if I did and I spoke in my lecturing mode at home all of the time. They'd kick me out. They wouldn't be able to bear living with me. So we modify our mode and style of delivery for the context, I think. Formality of language. Again, you know, we've all been to conferences, I'm sure, where you've heard speakers literally read their paper as if they were reading a script. And it's very formal language because they've written their script for a journal article and now they're reading it with no changes and no concession to the fact that it's being delivered orally. And we all know how tedious that is and how difficult to follow that is. So using less formal language, using that's instead of that is and won't instead of will not, these kind of things can be very useful just to break down the barriers between you and your audience. Something else that can break down barriers between you and your audience is the way you dress as well, of course. I have to admit that sometimes if I'm giving a one-off lecture, if I'm just coming into a module and giving one lecture, I might put on a slightly whiter shirt. I might even wear a suit jacket or a blazer. You never know, because I do tend to dress fairly informally, barely even tucking my shirt in at times. I think if I was coming in to give a single lecture, I would definitely tuck my shirt in. But my feeling apart from that is, well, you should really dress to teach in for a lecture what you dress to teach in for the rest of the time. There shouldn't be any huge change. And this can be a way of saying, look, I'm a perfectly normal person. I'm just the teacher that you already know, but in a lecturing situation. Because the lecturing situation is the way rooms are set out makes the barriers all the greater, I think, with you at the front and the audience in front of you in the auditorium. You're clearly at the front. You're the person who's deemed to be in charge. So if you can break down those barriers through any means, through the language you use or your appearance, then all the better. We also talked a little bit in the face-to-face workshop about keeping people engaged, keeping everybody engaged, which is such a hard task in a lecture. And one of the things we can do, first of all, is know something about them. We can find out something about our audience. We can send them a little survey, first of all, as I did with my face-to-face group this week, asking some basic questions like, what's your subject area? Now, you may fly into a module where lots of students from different programs are studying on that single module or are coming together for some reason in one lecture, in one time. You may want to know what subjects they're studying. You can ask them a bit about their experience. So I asked the face-to-face group this time about their past experience in lecturing. What was the largest class they've ever taught? How frequently do they teach very large groups now? Is it a couple of times a year, a few times, or many times? And I also, in that survey, gave my students the opportunity to ask questions of me. I said, are there any particular things you'd like me to address during the workshop on Thursday, as it was this week? And I got lots of interesting questions. You know, can you think about how we can engage students, how we can discourage students from sitting at the back when they enter the room? Useful little practical things like this, around which I structured my workshop. So we can know something about our students and what they want to achieve from the session before we begin. And during the class, well, we can use polling, we can use audience response systems. We can ask students questions, whether before we deliver a segment of content or afterwards, to check for understanding and to develop that further. And there are some very good free tools out there like Poll Everywhere, which helps us to do that. We talked about other things like setting expectations. We were using smartphones in the lecture workshop, and I said, phones will be used sometimes. I'll get you to search for things on the internet. I'll get you to contribute to a back channel. We had a back channel going on during the workshop. So there will be times for phones, but there will also be times for no phones. And when I'm talking, when I'm doing my lecturing, I don't want you to be using your phones. And I made that expectation very clear. And I also promised that I would never speak in a block longer than 10 minutes. There would always be something for the students to do in between those blocks, but I would never be speaking for more than 10 minutes at any one time. Now that can be a bit trickier in a webinar because by nature you're broadcasting more. It seems more like a delivery mode. But I want to explore over the next few minutes some of the things we can do that are specific to webinars to make them a little bit more interactive, even when we have large audiences. Okay, I think at this stage, let's see what is coming up. Yes, I think at this stage I am going to come back on the screen, hopefully. And there I should be. Okay, so there I am in front of you. So I'm not sharing anything at the moment in the webinar room. Now, let's think about specifically webinars. Our operating system, our piece of software for webinars at GCU is Blackboard Collaborate, which is like our VLE, a Blackboard tool. So hopefully they all fit rather nicely together. That's the theory anyway. And Blackboard Collaborate, I've used it a number of times now. It's very easy to use, it's quite intuitive. The layout of the interface is pretty simple. Even a relative technophobe like me can't get too lost using this software. Now watch me get lost. Now, there's a central area here in which I've appeared at the moment. That's our main area of the webinar. And there you either see the speaker's face, me, if I'm not sharing anything, or you might be seeing some slides that I've shared, or a PDF. I can bring in a file that we can read through together, or I can show you a blank whiteboard as well, and we can do things using that whiteboard. I've just noticed on the side here there's an option for sharing application, which is rather exciting. Now I'm not going to bring that in now. I was wondering if you could bring in a website, for example, and I could play you a YouTube video live in Blackboard Collaborate. I might be able to do that, but I'm not going to try it now because I've never done it before, and I don't want to embarrass myself horribly at this stage. Okay, so there's that central zone where the speaker is, where the slides are, where anything being shared is. And at the side, there's a sidebar as well. And that's for things like chatting. Now I can see a participant list there. I can see who's there. I can see whether anyone's got their hand up, anyone wants to speak. And we can do chatting along. Now you've all probably used that. You type your name in, you get going, you've entered the room, and you chat away to each other. You can talk about things the facilitator is talking about. So you can use that as a teaching tool as well, encouraging people towards the chat. One thing to note though is that the chat bar doesn't show up on the recording. So if you're watching this webinar as a recorded webinar later on, you won't see the chat bar, which is rather troublesome. So that's worth remembering live. If you're responding directly to a particular question that's coming through chat, you'll need to repeat the question orally, out loud, before you respond to it, if you want people on the recorded webinar to know what on earth you're talking about. Now that takes a bit of habit to get into. Okay, and then underneath there are some other functions, like at the bottom I can see a picture of a hand like that. And if I want to raise my hand, I just click on the hand. I'm going to do that now and see if it makes a fancy noise. It didn't that time. It usually does when other people raise their hand. And maybe it will have made a fancy noise in the recording that I didn't hear. And do it again, and then I lower my hand. And if you're the facilitator, you can see all those hands going up in the participant list, and you can lower everybody's hands, and you can ask a question that requires a yes or no answer, or please raise your hand if, that kind of thing, and instantly you get some feedback there. It's like a very basic, crude poll, if you like. All right. Now, what is it a good idea to do in a webinar with a large audience? Well, I think it's probably good to establish some ground rules, just as if you were in a real face-to-face live setting. So I'm going to go back to sharing my files now, and I'm going to start from this particular slide, which is all about house rules. And hopefully what will have happened here is that in the middle, in the big sharing space of the webinar, the slide has appeared and my face has disappeared. And you'll see now a list of house rules that you can encourage people with at the beginning of a webinar. So you can say things like, well, look, please use the text chat. There'll be opportunities throughout the webinar to use text chat, and I want you to keep on using it. However, because it's only me and I'm on my own facilitating this webinar, I will address the text chat only at specific times. So don't expect me to always have one eye on the chat, because I am actually facilitating the webinar at the same time. However, I will stop off at some points and look at the chat and see if there's any questions or interesting points to raise. There I go, speaking very quickly now, very unhelpfully. What is helpful is that if you can have a friend in another office, or maybe next door to you, next to you in the actual room, they can be in charge of looking at the text chat, and they can perhaps alert you to various interesting points that you might want to explore or expand upon. So just as you would team teach sometimes in face-to-face situations, team teaching in a webinar situation can also be very helpful, particularly if you're playing around with the technology and it's not going to plan. Technology sometimes breaks, and that's the panic in my eyes sometimes that comes across, and everybody can see you because there's a camera on you. So you can be sorting that out while your friend holds the fort. You can tell your students, raise your hand please if you wish to speak. Again, easier to manage with small groups than it is much larger groups. Moderators might switch off mics. So if you've established a ground rule whereby you've said, we'll take contributions but only 30 seconds please, then you can say, well, I've legitimately said that moderators might switch off mics at some point. Sometimes the reception, the broadband, the actual technology is not very good for picking up people speaking, and you might hear all sorts of horrid noises. Again, a good opportunity to switch off mics at that point. And just to say to the students, please participate in the activities. And for the rest of the webinar, I'm just going to show you a couple of activities that you can do in a webinar situation with very large groups. And the first one of those is this. It's an icebreaker. You can simply say to the students, I would like you please to click on the smiley which shows me how you're feeling today. All right? So you have to then tell your students to go up to the very top of their Blackboard Collaborate window and click on the hand tool. Now I've clicked on the hand tool now, it's called the pointer, and I've brought my hand tool over some of these smiley faces now. Now again, I don't know whether this will show up on the recording, but I promise you it is happening live. I can click on this very happy smiling chap here, there we go, or this person here, or this person here, or this person here, and these things you will find, if there's lots of students in the room and they're all clicking on various faces, they will leave their mark on that slide, and you'll find that these hand symbols cluster around certain faces. I mean, you can always ask them to do this with a pencil as well. If they go to the very top of the Collaborate screen and click on the pencil, you can get them to draw a pattern. that's the one I am today, or even in a different colour, this is the one I am today, this one at the bottom, all right? And then you can come along and just click erase, and away they go. Those have disappeared. Now, I gave some quite clear instructions then, I hope. I said, go up to the top of your Collaborate window, find the hand tool, come along, click upon the smiley that best represents how you're feeling today, or go and get the pencil tool. Students will need to be supported in using these tools as much as you will need to practice using them yourself. Clear instructions are everything when it comes to online learning, I think. Okay, so that's a very simple ice-breaking activity. Let's think about how you can use polling. Now, you can use polling in a number of quite crude ways live in a webinar. You'll need to play around with this as a facilitator yourself, because I can't really show you the facilitator's window right now. But you can easily create polls with certain numbers of options, and the options are simply numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As yet, I haven't found a way to type in responses that students can click them, but a poll will appear, I promise you, for the students to see with click either option 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or however many options you have. You can see here on the slide, I have 5 options. So I would say to the students, look, here are some major global threats of today, of the 21st century. I would like you to choose the global threat that you think is most severe. Most severe. And you can simply say to the students, they are numbered 1 to 5. 1 is international terrorism, 2 is climate change, 3 is pandemics, etc., etc. And then they simply click on the number that corresponds. So if they think that cyber warfare is the most severe global threat today, they click on number 4 when you release the poll. And again, this poll won't show up in a recording of a Collaborate session, so you will need to speak through this if you want your students to benefit from the recording after all. So let's pretend that the students have selected their most severe threats, and cyber warfare, number 4, has come out as the least threatening. Okay, so that's very interesting. That's come out as the least threatening. So I am now going to put a squiggly line through cyber warfare. This hopefully should crop up in a moment. You should hopefully see that I've blanked out cyber warfare a little bit using my pencil tool. Okay, so now we have 4 options, and I can set up very quickly a 4 option poll, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Again, it's fairly obvious what I'd like my students to do. 4 options, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Choose the one that you think is most severe. I'm going to try and blank out this time with a shape. That doesn't seem to have worked very well. Okay. I'm going to try and blank out again in that case with a pencil tool. And yes, I'm using a black pencil tool again. I'm going to scrub out one of them. Okay, so you can hopefully see that there's now 2 of the options gone, and I can keep doing this. We can do another poll with 3 options to eliminate another one, and then we're down to our final 2. And again, the option here is now between 1 and 2. So you've now used polling in a very crude way, but you as the whole group have got down to a winner in a poll type scenario. I've also found that if you've got lots of people and you've tried to set a time limit and you keep on commenting and saying, look, 10 seconds now to make your choice, you do in the end need to have some kind of sound cue to bring your students back together again, just as you might have to in a very large face-to-face lecture. And I've used quite successfully this train whistle. It's a good way of saying the activity is finished. Be gentle though with these audio cues, because people might be wearing headphones. Try not to make them too loud. Right, again, I can just clear everything now, bring it back and move on to my next slide. Aha, an XY axis. Great. Now, I'm going to ask my audience a question about their experience of facilitating webinars and their level of confidence. And I'm going to ask each student to plot on this graph the number of webinars that they've facilitated and their confidence in facilitating a webinar. I'm going to ask each student to put a little cross on the axes. So you might find that people are starting to put crosses on there, up here, here, and all these crosses emerge because you've asked, 100, 200 people to do this, maybe in your webinar. And you're saying, oh, there's 10 seconds left, there's only 10 seconds left, so I'm going to put mine, I've probably done 20 or so maybe, and my confidence is okay now, so I'm going to put myself there. And now, that is the end of the activity. And you can come along maybe with a different colour or with a line or some such, and you can say, right, well, that's interesting, I'm going to try and plot a line up there and see if there's any correlation. And that can be the starting point for a conversation about whatever it is you're looking at. All right? It doesn't need to be done at the end of a piece of content. It can be done at the beginning as an introduction to a piece of content, if you so wish. An X-Y axis, all these things have to be visual, you see. It's a very visual medium. Again, I can get rid of it and move on. Now this activity uses a map, so you can see we're also going to do some plotting here. And I'm going to ask my students again to click on the pencil tool at the very top to select blue, a specific colour this time. And I'm going to ask everyone, I'm going to split people up into groups. I'm going to ask, first of all, people born in February, May, August or November, to put a blue dot, to make a blue mark in the country where they were born. So you might get lots of stuff going on here, unsurprisingly. You might get some stuff going on here at the moment because we're running African Leadership College stuff in Mauritius. And, you're bound to get people dotted all over the place because that is wonderfully the nature of the world we live in. People from every continent, I'm sure, represented in not just GCU staff, but on this very module. Okay, so you'll get coloured dots there. Now I'm going to ask everyone born in March, June, September or December to put a yellow dot. So again, select the pencil tool, select the yellow colour, to put a dot in the country where their smartphone was made. Now this will take a little bit of time because people will think, oh goodness, I wonder what that is. So you might have to go away and facilitate this in the chat. But you will generally find, I'm sure, that smartphones will have been made in what we generally know as the Far East. Okay, so you'll get lots around here. You'll get lots of dots around here. There'll be clustering, essentially. Okay. People may not know exactly where the countries are, which is part of the fun. If there's things being manufactured in these countries, why shouldn't we know exactly where they are? It's a little preposterous that we don't. And then I sometimes would get the third group. Now, who have we got left? We've got students born in January, April, July or October. To select the pencil tool and now select the red colour and to think of a classical composer. And then to put a red dot in the country where that composer was born. Again, you might have to just get people to name composers, Mozart, Beethoven, whoever, in the chat box. And I would tell the students which country they were born in. Okay, so you're going to get lots in Western Europe. All right, you get lots in Germany, Austria, Italy, France, maybe. You get lots around there, maybe even Britain. So you're going to have some clustering going on. There we go, and we can see there the students have made these clusters on the map. And you then, as the teacher, can extrapolate from these clusters and use this to start doing some teaching. You could say, well, first of all, the blue clusters, that's interesting. That shows us that we've got a very diverse student population. We can talk about that. You can say that there's a real bedrock of manufacturing in the world at the moment, and it's in the global East. And you can say that classical civilization really is sort of, again, clustered in what we would call the old world, Western Europe. And you might say, well, it's interesting, isn't it, that we put a lot of store still by things that we see as high art, high culture, that we tend to think of as old culture as well, that are located in the old world, in the West. And isn't it funny that things are manufactured in the Far East, but where do the profits end up from this manufacture? Well, they tend to end up, I would imagine at the moment, I'm going to select a different colour for this, the concluding colour. I suspect they tend to end up around about here on the west coast of America, or maybe I'm being rather jaundiced in that. But because you've got the students to create a visual of their own, based on their own experiences, you have a prop to start talking about that, rather than just talk for 20 minutes on your particular subject. You've got your students to do something first, which is rather good, and you can draw out some trends from that. Okay, well, they are my activities for today, and you can play around with those and adapt those as much as you like. I'm going to clear the clusters from there, and actually for now I am going to just stop sharing the slides, and I will appear back on the screen as if by magic. Goodness, what a scary prospect. And while I'm on the screen, I'm just going to make some very brief concluding points to say that, well, the video element in webinars is not always very well used. You certainly don't want to see my face all of the time, but seeing my face some of the time, i.e. not seeing slides all the time, but sometimes seeing my face, does perform a very useful social function, in that you get to know me a little bit better, I hope. Maybe we will never meet, you, me the teacher, you the student, particularly if you're teaching a group of students in, say, Mauritius for the African Leadership College. You may never meet them face to face. So it's important that you establish that social bond, that social link, and using video carefully in a webinar is one useful way of doing it. Similarly, when people are making contributions in real time in a webinar, again, this is a small group thing maybe, when they're making contributions in real time, whether by audio or by video, coming on and actually saying something rather than typing in the chat box, then they're being unguarded and real time in a way that's actually very hard to replicate in the chat box. People are never being totally unguarded in the chat box. Even if they're typing very, very fast, they can just check and see what they've written first before pressing enter. So that's very useful as well. In terms of actually presenting, my advice is, and the advice I've received, is always to speak to the camera as much as possible. I've got a little webcam here mounted on top of my monitor, and it's got a little blue light shining in it. And I just try and talk to that blue light as much as I possibly can, as if I were looking my students in the eye. So try and sit as close to the camera as you can. I don't mean this close, so that you're blocking off the whole screen and showing everybody your every wrinkle, but I mean having a good sort of, there I am in half of the screen. You can clearly see me. And what I've often enjoyed when I've been in webinars as a student or a participant and the person has been facilitating is that sometimes they've sat off to the side like this, like I am now. They haven't sat directly in the middle, sat off to the side, and that's allowed them to use their hands as well. They've been able to articulate, which I think is rather good. It all gives more of a flavour of you as a human being, and that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the social function. And if you really need your students to focus on a slide, you can simply turn off your video. I've just turned off my video. There we go. You can still hear me, but you'll now be focusing on, for example, a slide that I've put up there. Okay. And again, I can easily get rid of the slide and turn my video back on, hopefully. Hopefully you'll be able to see me there. Okay, so don't forget about the power of simply turning off your camera sometimes to make people concentrate more. Turning off the audio is slightly riskier because if it suddenly goes silent, people get very nervous that you've disappeared. But by all means, turn off your audio when you've set the students a task. They probably don't want to listen to you blowing your nose. Right, okay, well, that's all for today, folks. Thanks very much for watching.